Hello again and welcome back to Harry's Jeti Clinic. I've been set a challenge by Nick Jackson, which is nice and straightforward to achieve, and I believe I've interpreted it correctly, Nick. What you want is a 3-position switch that actually switches 4 flight modes. For your glider, you want it to start in launch mode, with the switch in 1 position. But once you've switched it to, say, cruise mode after you've come off the launch, switching it back to what was the launch mode now switches it to thermal mode. So having started in launch mode, the switch now only goes between speed, cruise and thermal, not back into launch mode. This saves you having to use another switch when you come off launch to actually physically switch it and stop it or allow that position of the 3-position switch to become thermal. So I think I've interpreted that correctly, and here's how we go about it. We'll pop into our menu, fine tuning, flight modes. We've got 4 flight modes: speed, cruise, launch, and default, which we shall rename thermal. Should have done this before I switched the camera on, shouldn't I? It just makes it easy. Thermal. Say OK to that. Now, it's important that the launch mode is higher up the list, a lower number, than thermal mode. The reason being that if you have 2 modes switched on, the system will always choose which is the higher mode in the list, i.e. the lower number, as the one to actually use. You can see I've set up, I'm using switch SA, which is over here, a 3-position switch. In up, I've got speed mode. Cruise, I've got the mode is in the middle of the switch, but I haven't assigned anything to launch mode. And of course, you can't assign anything to what is the default mode, because if everything goes off, the default mode is the one it will use. Because in effect, default mode, which we've renamed thermal, is always switched on. Always, even if you don't create flight modes, default mode is there and it's switched on. And you think, well, hang on, if it's always switched on, how do the others switch on? Well, remember, they're higher up the list, a lower number, so whichever one of these comes on, it overrides the default mode. And you notice that in the default mode, the up and down arrows don't work. I cannot move default mode higher up the list, whereas if I go to one of the others, I can move it up or down the list. Cannot move this one, and this is the important part of this little programming solution. So what do we do about launch mode? Well, what we're going to do is create a latching switch that switches off once we've moved to cruise mode. How will we do that? Well, let's take a look at my fabulous little diagram here. We're going to use a logic switch. It's going to be an OR logic switch. One input will be our flight mode switch at its middle position, which I'm using as the cruise position. Well, not necessarily the middle. Whatever position you want to use as cruise as you come off the launch position. And the output we then feed back in on itself. Now, when you switch the transmitter on, your switch is going to be in its launch position, so that input will be off. And the input from its output will be off as well, so the output will be off. As soon as you switch your switch away from launch into the cruise mode, that goes on. So the output goes on. Because we're feeding the output back on itself, that input is on. Once you switch this away to thermal or speed modes, that will go off, but because it's feeding back on itself, it stays latched on. And then we can just reverse it to get the conditions we want. So let's have a look at that. Say OK there. Come out of here. Advanced properties, logical switches. I'll give it a label, shall we? Let's call it launch. You don't have to give it a name at all. It's just if you've got multiple logic switches, it then becomes easier to remember which one is which, but when you've only got one, it doesn't really matter. Enable it. Right, control 1 will be the switch in the cruise position, or whichever is the first position you come off after launch, which I would suggest is going to be cruise, and I think that's what Nick said it would be anyway. So I'll move it one position away from cruise position, come in here, move it to the cruise position, say OK. Control 2 is going to be the logic switch itself. Say OK to that, and the condition is OR. OK? And now it's latched on. I can switch. This is the 3-position switch. I'm switching it round all 3 positions. It's latched on because, you know, we set it on, so the output just stays on. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. Say OK to that. And now we can come back to our fine-tuning flight modes, and we'll assign the launch mode to that logical switch, but we'll reverse it. We'll in effect turning it from an OR switch into a not OR switch. And the reason being, we want launch to latch off now. So when the switch goes on, the launch mode latches to the off position. So we're going to assign it to the launch logic switch, but we're going to reverse it. It's very important. Say OK. And now what happens is, because we've already been moving the switch, and the OR logic switch has gone to its on state, but we've reversed it here, it is latched off. Yeah, the OR gate is latched on, but we reversed its input, so it's latched off. And now I can switch in the physical switch between speed, cruise, and when I go to the 3rd position, launch is latched off. Everything's off. Default mode, which is our thermal mode, is on. Let's prove it. We'll switch. We're in switch away, which would be launch mode. Shut down. Start it back up. It's in launch mode with the switch away from me. I've launched. I move it to cruise mode, and now if I move it switch back to where it was a second ago in launch mode, it's thermal mode. So I've now got thermal, cruise, speed, cruise, thermal, cruise, speed. The only way to get it back to launch mode is to switch the transmitter off, then on again. What will happen if we've left the switch in the speed mode setting? Or in fact in cruise setting, because that's the one that really fires off the gate. See, it's trying to start in default mode. It's gone to cruise mode because we've left the switch in cruise. And of course that means we can't get into launch mode. You think, oh bugger, am I going to have to switch the whole thing off and on again? No. What we can do, of course, is advanced properties. Stick switch is set up. It's switch A I'm using. I'll put it into what will be my launch or thermal mode. You see, in that position, we've got a tick. So the required pre-flight position is on. Say OK to that. Come out of here. Now prove it once again. We'll really shut down. Yes. I've put the switch in its middle cruise position, and I'll try and switch on the transmitter. Yes, it doesn't like it. It wants me to push the switch down to the launch position. There we are. We're in launch mode. Come off the launch, switch to cruise, and now it's thermal, cruise, and speed modes. Okie doke, enjoy that. Don't go away just yet. This is a little extra video I've edited onto the original one. The original solution of using the latching OR switch works perfectly well and does exactly what Nick had asked for. However, some of Nick's colleagues in competition gliding pointed out to him that if he needs to relaunch quickly during a competition slot, because he's landed out very quickly and then wants to get going again, he's going to lose precious seconds switching the radio off and then back on again in order to reset the launch mode. And so one of his friends kindly showed him how to just put in an AND switch into the return path where the OR gate loops back on itself, so that he could put in an additional switch which would reset it back to launch mode. However, one of the switches that Jeti has put into logical switches in the latest software update, which was 5.03 at the time of making this, will do both the OR and the AND functions in effect for us. So if we reassign our launch mode to L3, let's have a look at logic switch 3. And we're making use of this condition, where A switches on and B switches off. So Control A will be your flight mode switch, launch, cruise, thermal speed, etc. And you want to set it with the on position in your cruise mode, i.e. the one you're going to switch to after launch. Then B, the off switch, is going to be your reset switch. I'm going to use the spring-loaded switch here so that I cannot leave it on. I'll just pull it towards me, switch is on, there we go. And the point is that this A on, B off, if I move it there, I set switch A on, the switch comes on, and nothing I do now with switch A will switch it off. It can only switch off when Control B is moved to its on position, and now it stays locked off. Okie doke. And it won't reset until I can reset Control A again, and then it's locked on again. And so then, having made that, all we have to do in assigning it to the flight mode is to reverse it. See, reverse is switched on. The reason being that the A on, B off is working the opposite way round to what we want for that flight mode locking out. So just to prove it, reset it. We start in launch with a switch up, switch to middle, goes to cruise, switch back, it's gone to thermal, not launch mode, and it's now locked in speed, cruise and thermal mode. But if I just pull the reset switch, bingo, you've got launch mode again. Okie doke, have fun with it.